It's a privilege to welcome you. This is my first welcoming of an A conference in this university. And this annual conference caught my eyes and one of the most important things that we do at this university. We are very proud of what our students do and what you do. And I think that from my understanding is this one of the first degree awarding departments in Scotland since 1980s. And this is something to be very proud of. There are two things we need to recognize in here, and is that the growing strengths of the scholarly field in this area, cultural studies, communication and journalism. And the other one, which is this university's commitment to what we call it the University for Common Good. I don't know how familiar you are with the universities and academia, and I'm sure many of you are. We are very good at explaining people what we are good at, but we are not very good to tell them what we are good for. So but one thing I think you guys do better than others is you're very good at telling what you're good for. And that is the distance between being good at something and being good for something in your discipline is pretty short. And this is something which we should celebrate. We recognize that creative industry sector remains one of the most buoyant one in the UK and in the world. And it is a part of the heavily accelerating part of our economy. According to recent statistics, I think they are even generate more financial income for the country compared to telecoms and automotive industries. And this is something which has been recognized, and I think we are very happy to be able to be one of the leaders in Scotland and the UK. Our graduates from this university, they are deeply embedded across the Scottish and other sectors, and also I think they work across Europe. For those people who have watched EastEnders, River City, Doctors, or any of the major news networks, and commercial radio stations, or even read the newspaper, whether it's in print or online. They would have been part of the audience of our graduates. And we are hugely proud of outstanding work that our graduates do to this particular discipline and industry. Your conference this week is extremely important. And it is a chance for all of you to interact with each other and also to lead your discipline, understand who does what in other parts of the country and the world. And this is also to understand ourselves and others through stories and narratives. And this is how we can convey the message across different parts of the media. My background is in engineering and cybernetics. And every time I looked at media and journalism, I call it cybernetics with a human touch. And this is the bit that the media can help. I don't use the word control, but it has a very big role in shaping how the society and how the communities work and interact with each other. And this is where cybernetics try to control the systems and machineries. So there's the philosophical closeness between these two. And let us recognize that our university, the scholarly analysis and understanding of the media and communication will be increasingly dominant and important in all our futures. And it is with my great pleasure and honor to be able to stand here in front of you and welcome you to our campus and wish you a very stimulating and enjoyable conference today and in the days to come. Thank you for coming here and welcome to Scotland.
I'd like to welcome up Professor Einar Thorsen, who's chair of MeCCSA, and just to say we're very grateful, Einar, for you opting to let us step in here and bring MeCCSA to Caledonian here. So please welcome Einar.
Hi everyone, on behalf of MeCCSA, welcome to our annual conference 2023 and welcome to Glasgow, the city and GCU promises to be an absolutely fantastic venue for our conference. And special thanks to Simon and everyone at Glasgow Caledonian University for organising what promises to be another great conference. Hopefully not quite as eventful as last year when the Queen passed away. But seriously, thanks for stepping in on short notice to pull this off. I know it's been an awful lot of hard work over the past 10 months. So yes, everyone, we are back in Scotland and not on the sunny beaches of southern Cornwall. GCU kindly agreed to host MECCSA 2023 after the executive committee decided in November last year to pull out of Falmouth University hosting our conference as we had originally planned, and a lot of you will have been aware of. That was a direct consequence of the negative impact creating a two-tier workforce at Falmouth University would have had on our members and the field more broadly. I'm going to say a bit more about that decision at the AGM tomorrow, but I did also want to recognise the efforts of the Falmouth organising committee, who had actually been working on that conference since the original proposal in 2019, and of course delayed as well due to the pandemic. So the annual general meeting is open to everyone, takes place tomorrow between 3 and 4:30. And that's also when we will be announcing the winners of the MECCSA Awards for 2023 and presenting recipients of our new honorary life membership category. MECCSA is a very broad subject association covering a wide range of subject areas, which always reaches far beyond the conference theme. So this is rather an eclectic gathering with around, I think this time, 250 delegates, full of new perspectives, some great keynotes, and a fabulous range of papers. But as with any conference, one of the most important aspects is the collective it affords us, our coming together and the social interaction that happens in between our papers. So don't forget to also join us at the entirely informal and non-competitive pub quiz tonight, and the Ceilidh for a little dance tomorrow evening. And welcome again to MECCSA, and I hope you all have a great 3 days at our conference. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up a member of our department, Kate Nye, Dr. Kate Nye, who's going to come up and introduce our first keynote.
I appreciate the applause. Thank you. My name is Kate Nye. I'm on the Local Access Committee to help bring this conference here, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Annette Hill as our first keynote speaker. This is only a little slightly less scary than when I first met Annette when she was my external examiner for my PhD Viva. Annette is a professor of media and communication. In the bio and the program, it says Lund University, but she's since moved to Young Sherping. Her research focuses on audiences and popular culture, with interest in media engagement, everyday life, genres, production studies, cultures of viewing. She's the author of 10 books, several journal articles, and edited collections, which address everything, varieties of reality TV, live events, sports entertainment, film violence, media ethics. She's got quite a wide range. Her latest books include the Handbook of Media Socialities, Media Engagement, and her next books coming out are the Routledge Companion to Media Audiences and Roaming Audiences. And so we are just thrilled that she's kicking off this conference with her keynote on platform Imaginaries, and it's my absolute privilege to introduce Annette Hill, Professor Annette Hill.
So here we are. I've just moved to my new job, Jönköping University, which makes me now a professor of the Great Lake. It's a huge lake, and it's my privilege to start working there. Before that, I was at Lund University, and before that, I was at the University of Westminster. And I'm asking, how are we roaming entertainment platforms? That's one storytelling thread today. And why does this matter for our thinking around media imaginaries? And I mentioned these 4 conceptual developments, and I want to look at this notion of roaming, which is crisscrossing platforms. And I've been writing about it for a while in my book, Media Experiences, and work with JC Lee on Southeast Asian entertainment platforms. So I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit more today. The second conceptual development is about mediated mobility, because if I want to understand how audiences crisscross and roam platforms, I need to understand their movements in some way. And most importantly, I need to understand their differential resources for movement, sometimes called motility in mobility studies. And there I'm inspired by the latest work by David Morley on mobility and media and communication studies, and Kaufman's work on motility, thinking about the power to move or not move. My third key conceptual development is around imaginaries. And in particular, I'm inspired by the work of Roland Barthes and his discussion of contrary realities, which is what he calls it, contrary realities. And I'll unpack that a little bit more with you. But that's been a source of inspiration for me in Barthes' work, and in particular, a little book called The Eiffel Tower and Other Stories, where he beautifully expands on his notion of the cultural imaginary in various different pieces in that book. And then in the Routledge Handbook to Mobile Socialities that I co-edited with the wonderful Maren Hartman and Magnus Andersson, we've been exploring imaginaries in various different ways, cultural imaginaries in that edited collection. And then my fourth conceptual development is cultural citizenship, and there I'm drawing on Yoke Hermer's recent new book. It's a wonderful book, where she talks about research as world building, and that applies to the empirical research I'm going to present today. So let me take you through those four conceptual developments. What's roaming? Why do I like this term? What do I mean by it? I'm interested in it because it tells me about the pathways and tracks people make as they crisscross the digital media landscape. And I don't see them as flowing smoothly across the digital media landscape. I see them crisscrossing. And roamers is a lovely generative term that takes into account the rights of movement across common land. And for example, in Sweden we have a custom called allemansrätten, or the British right of way. And that allows citizens to roam across landscapes. And there I've been very inspired and have written a lot about Robert Macfarlane's beautiful nature writing in relation to roaming. And you can find that in my book, Media Experiences. I think he's just such an inspiring writer about wayfaring and roaming. And when we consider roaming in the media landscape, we're dealing with a virtual and a material sense of rights to roam across information and entertainment, and both under and overground, both including legal and illegal practices. And for me, this is an inspiring way to think about the movements of audiences for entertainment platforms. My second conceptual development, mediated mobility. Here I'm interested in the patterns of mobility for roamers, my roamers, and the entertainment platforms they're crisscrossing, and the matter of their motility, which is their capacity or potential for being mobile. And here, again, quoting from David Morley's work in the Handbook of Mobile Socialities, he says, only if we address the issue of motility from that perspective can we highlight the question of power, especially the question of who has power or control over their own mobility and their movements and those of others. So it gets us to a kind of classic question around power dynamics and the movement of roamers in entertainment platforms. I mentioned Roland Barthes, great source of inspiration. And the way Barthes thinks about the imaginary is both what an artifact might be, its potentiality as a cultural resource, and what an artifact is, its existing meanings embedded in norms, values, and practices. And Barthes, when he writes about the imaginary, particularly in this little book, the Eiffel Tower and Other Stories, he's often drawing out opposing views, such as actors taking contrapositions, beliefs that are opposed to each other, myths that conceal other meanings. I mean, Barthes is so interested in spectacle in so many of these pieces in this little book. And he describes it as a contrary reality that he's interested in figuring out. And I think this is a term that's so useful for unraveling the enmeshment of actors and material objects and contexts that produce media imaginaries. So this contrariness, this contrary imaginary, contrary reality is something I find very interesting for the work. And just to kind of touch base with Joke Hermer's new book, Cultural Citizenship and Popular Culture, out now as an ebook with Rowledge, I'm doing a big plug. She describes the importance of listening. Listening comes through, it's even in the subtitle to the book, the importance of listening to storytelling. And she asks us to cherish the surprise in empirical research. Listening to communities and world buildings. She talks about stories will start suggesting themselves, she says, when you're listening to your empirical material. Whether a project is aimed at understanding, at appreciation or critique, or as a counterpart to a design intervention, she puts forward an argument about research for world building, which becomes valuable in well-documented storytelling it allows for. And that you'll see that becomes very important to me, listening to my Romas and their storytelling. And looking through the program, there are conversations I would love to have with you over the next few days about some of the work that you're exploring, exciting work. And I can see that Kennedy and friends are looking at alternative cultures of platform practices, and that's something I'm very interested in, looking at alternative cultures, and in particular, what we can say about transnational platform practices. I see there's a wonderful project about data commons in Scotland, and I'm interested in that in relation to rights to roam, so this notion of rights to roam in relation to data commons. Is it a dream rather than a reality? Very interested in that. I see that there's some fantastic work in several panels about ecological imaginaries. And here I would argue the contrary reality is a key part of that. In fact, I would link it to Alexis Shotwell's work on Against Purity to look at contrariness and contradiction within an ecological imaginary. And I see that Alison Preston and friends are looking at multidimensionality with online media literacies, and that very interests me in the work that I'm presenting today as well. So I hope to carry on these threads, these conversations with you over time. Now, this is my 4 theoretical developments, but what empirical paths am I exploring for roaming audiences? And I developed 4, and I developed them almost by accident. I designed this research working with a team of fantastic postgraduate researchers at Lund who gave up their valuable time and their wonderful curiosity to do research with me. And in designing the long-form interviews with them, things weren't working. We realized that we were really struggling to get at the movements that people were making across entertainment platforms. And that made me figure out that problem through a creative exercise. So we developed these 4 paths as a kind of methodological package. And the first one is a drawing exercise where people creatively represent their spatial relations in their platform maps, and you'll see some of those in a moment. So a drawing exercise. And for me, this focuses on spatial relations in this work. The second methodological pathway is a walk and talk, using kind of walking methodology idea, a walk and talk through their platform map, and that articulates for me their mobility relations. As they narrativize their walk and talk through their map, I start to see their mobility relations. The third path I developed is a narrative account of their platform map. For example, we would say, well, we see that you've built Disney as a tower. Tell us about that. What kind of character would you put in that tower then? And so they start to provide a narrative account of their platform map. and in their imaginary landscape, and that explores for me their affective relations. So that gives me their affective relations. And the fourth method path that we've developed is a reflexive account about how green is your streaming. So a reflective account about green streaming that explores human-computer relations. So 4 relational ways to unpack what audiences are up to with their platforms. I got 3 contexts for you, 3 transnational contexts. Let's take a look. This first context is a case study of streaming services for Indonesia and Malaysia. And it's 20 interviews with Gen Zs living in urban areas of Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur with a sort of high internet penetration and broadband subscriptions. And this was conducted with a wonderful scholar, Jan Chung Lee, who's currently working in Calgary on a PhD. And we've written together, we produced an article, an early idea about this, which is a focus on platform imaginaries and mediated mobilities. If you want to take a look, I can give you the sort of reference later. But that came out in Javnost. What's the first thing that we see across the patterns we see across this? The Netflix park is the big trope, the big takeaway trope, the Netflix park. Why are they drawing their maps in this way with the Netflix park? This 18-year-old student based in Jakarta explains, well, in the Netflix park, you can see there's Hulu, HBO, Amazon Prime and Twitch and Facebook, and with Disney Plus, it's like a tall building. Disney usually is some kind of tower block of some kind. And they have large content with many stories, with movies like that. And with Netflix, it's sectioned off. Do you see where Netflix is in this kind of, in this particular walled-in park? And there's sections, A, B, and C. It's very organized. And in Netflix, there's some streaming movies, there's some TV shows that aren't accessible in Indonesia. So Netflix is able to overcome a lot of censorship issues and giving them content that they normally can't look at on cable. Do you see where cable is? Right on the end there. See the cable channel with the arrow going out off the map? So cable's in serious trouble in this map. And you can see the eye is drawn into the Netflix park. And the Netflix park, as it turns up again and again and again in people's creative maps, starts to become commercially boxed in. So the Netflix park has commercial foreclosure within the imaginary. And here's this 18-year-old student based in Jakarta. I mean, you can see her map with the Netflix park. I love cable television, is a little bit bigger here, but other piracy services, very important part for this person's platform practices. Other subscription services, we'll come to that in a moment. The center of my whole entertainment life is Netflix. So that's there. And I associate the park with group activity. We have like picnics at the park, we cycle together, we walk together. I often use Netflix that way. I watch it with my friends, you know, Netflix party, or during a class, we all know this. When we don't want to pay attention to Professor Hill, we're there in the Netflix park. And then she starts to reflect on herself, right, and commercial foreclosure. Oversaturation of the market with Hulu and Amazon Plus and Disney Star. And I associate it with these like corporations taking control. So you start to see the awareness, the sun is shining, and picnics and friendliness in the Netflix park, and commercial foreclosure, and worry about this. And when we say, well, you know, characterize this for us, we're talking about the sort of character relations, it often comes up, Netflix, it's not, the park is not always this friendly place, and they describe it pretty much like you're in the John Wick movies and you're going in to get your arms from a kind of fancy boutique arms dealer. This is the way they describe the content. And literally, the student says it. Basically, you're paying the arms dealer. He has everything, all the guns you want. You know, get past the censorship within Indonesia, and you get this kind of boutique service. But there's a dark underlayer to it, a darkness to it as well in the characterization. All right, Netflix Park, as you can see, commercial foreclosure and a dark arms dealing going on at some points in the Netflix Park. Context 2, very different context now. Take you to Vietnam. And here I'm doing some research, which is still ongoing, so we're still cooking this data together with the amazing Long Nguyen. And we've done 10 interviews about indie Viet music, which is from self-producing and self-releasing artists for Gen Z listeners, called The Generation of Freedom by themselves, accessing this indie Viet music through SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. And they're very active in the indie community. And we've got this focus on the indie streaming, and in particular here, I want to flag up briefly for you the affective relations, so the affective and emotional side of this. And something I'm developing with a Chinese scholar called Yunyi Lao. We're just publishing a piece on Chinese slow reality television, where we've developed this notion of slow affect, which is this kind of feeling of relaxing outside the pressure of work in various different ways. And we see this notion coming through so much in the kind of the way sound, this indie music produces music streaming as healing. And here's someone, this is what they drew for us. This 20-year-old student, he's a Vietnamese indie musician, he's based in Singapore. And look at how he describes it. It's like an apartment, you know, on a high-rise with this very urban, boxed-in, stuck space. And there he is looking down on the street, so everything's kind of far away, it's blurry, it's not clear. He's sort of stuck there. So in terms of mobility, this kind of notion of being stuck tries to make sense of, well, the only entertaining thing is what he's been given to look through the window. And the music then takes him to a very colourful space. And look how he describes the colours separate from the room, this dark, brownish, oppressive room they're in, describing the kind of social, political context to where they feel. And he's listening to this indie music. When I'm sad, when I'm moody, I can point this out. I can get away from my negative feelings. It makes me feel better. This music helps people to do that, and it's a way to heal people, both creating the music and spreading it through various different streaming platforms. So this indie, Vietnamese indie music, really important for this notion of healing. I love this one. It's like the most poetic, beautiful discussion, an ocean of thoughts. So that's me in front of an ocean, this 22-year-old student based in Vietnam says. She even says this beautiful metaphor, ocean of thoughts, connected to indie music. It expresses my thoughts. It doesn't help me get questions. It gives me a calm mentality. I overcome my questions, living in a difficult authoritarian regime, not able to kind of get answers to her questions, but having this notion of reaching the sun, the sunset, feeling an enlightened state of mind. And it's such a moving, powerful phrase where she wants the courage to express yourself truly and honestly. And she's getting that through the lyrics and through this feeling it's giving her. And this slow affect that I'm developing as a concept of music streaming, it couldn't be more clear to me in this one image. This image, more than anything when I write this book, this image is the tone I want to create for the whole of my academic storytelling. Here's a banker based in Vietnam writing his picture on a banker development program piece of paper. And what is he imagining himself doing? Something radically different. The tree, this serenity, this peace, autumn and winter, my favorite seasons, trying to create this affective climate. It's quiet, you get this cool vibe, grassy bed, looking at the sky, not thinking about anything. The absolute opposite. And this also describes Barthes' notion of a contrary reality. He is drawing it on his banker development program. So I just love this image. Context 3, really briefly. I'm speeding up. I've got 5 minutes left? 7 minutes left? Okay. Third context, again, very different context. We're in the German entertainment streaming platform world, a big market. This is a small exploratory study we've been doing there with Gen Zs. Based in Germany, I've been doing it with the wonderful Nilofer Rahangi, who's doing a PhD in America right now. And here we're focusing on how green is your platforms, how green is your streaming. So I'm interested in that notion of imaginaries and sort of environmental imaginaries and green streaming. And you get the roaming around. So now I'm happy to see my idea of roaming coming through. Here's someone on their map showing them roaming, passing the street, passing Prime, searching, looking, figuring out where they want to go, can't really decide, looking at a video on YouTube, see a trailer, look at Netflix. You end up at Netflix. There's a sense already of commercial foreclosure coming in. You're roaming, you should be free to roam, but some sense of you're always going to end up somewhere around Netflix. So there's kind of like the algorithm pushing them into commercial foreclosure in Netflix. More and more of these maps are kind of gridlocks, a streaming gridlock. So I love this "you are here" right at the bottom of the map. And you're right in front of that. And then he says, I go to places, I put YouTube on and Spotify. If I got half an hour, these are the places I would be searching for streaming. And then you end up going down the road to Prime and Netflix, see a movie or a series. And then you can see where he's put Disney Plus. And then random streaming platforms, this is a key repetitive point, random streaming platforms, other players coming up, vying for attention in the sort of platform dominance. And then look at, and then right at, he's got places he doesn't, TV Now, and he doesn't regularly visit, so they're kind of like out there on the edges. But we're getting a sense of a kind of urban gridlock coming into place with these platform players. The YouTube line was a common one. So sort of here you can see the YouTube line coming into place. The little dots, the YouTube line follows you everywhere, so a sense of the algorithm and YouTube following them. Wherever you go, YouTube's there. Netflix, again, taking big real estate space here, the center of it all. And then the dots get a little bit bigger, if you can just sort of see that there, and then they get narrow. And if you just sort of watch there, he describes going down a tiny alley, and that means you actually, you've really got to know if you want to go there, otherwise you won't ever find it, and there is national TV and sports. So it's like right off the absolute edge, if you can sort of see that. Nowhere in the kind of main platform map. And when we asked them to characterize this, there was a raw capitalism to describing their maps. And Game of Thrones, a very, very common narrative that they would use for world building. Netflix would be, they go through various different parts of the power play within Game of Thrones. And you can see how they're characterizing Spotify and Prime and so on. And I just think that's kind of fascinating, them understanding the raw capitalism that's going on in their streaming platforms. Really interesting indeed. And they're very aware that their algorithm's stalking them. And some of them, a little bit like the drama You, are kind of like, well, we're having a relationship with our stalker. But knowing that the stalkers, the algorithm's eventually going to get them in some way. And kind of coming to terms with the compromise of living with your algorithm. It's a sort of compromised space. And knowing you can't do any better than be kind of learning about the compromises you have to make. So loving the algorithm with Netflix and then worrying about it. So just that kind of compromised state is very common here. How green is your streaming? Well, do people know? I don't know. It's a very early discourse to come out now about green streaming. Here you have somebody, a 24-year-old student based in Berlin with Turkish background, saying that here's the sun and the moon, illustrating them starting the day with Spotify, going through to YouTube, cable TV, not so important, Netflix, interesting with friends, Amazon, huge company with logistics and finances. They're starting to worry, they're not green, this isn't green. The Netflix park suddenly isn't a non-polluted space. And starting to reflect on, in the conversation, about electricity and carbon footprints and kind of being concerned, but a very kind of new idea coming out for them as we talk to them. The myth of the cloud carbon footprint, some of them worrying about it. Here's someone saying, well, I worry a lot about the environment, the topic of the digital carbon footprint, it's not really been on my mind. I've never really discussed it. Note the hesitancy in their voice. I'm not even sure if I watch a minute of content, I don't know, would that relate to anything, like driving a car or something? It's probably very low. I have no idea about the numbers, so can't grasp the sort of environmental imaginary around their platforms. So it's sort of a little too early for them to figure that out. And of course, we know data centers, huge, and in the Nordic region where I'm going, it's a massive industry in itself, and we know that the global carbon emissions are about the same as aviation. So to not understand how green is our streaming is a kind of absence, an absent presence in these platform maps, really important. And to finish, Robert Willem's written very beautifully, he's a Swedish scholar, an anthropologist, about imperfect imaginaries. He's explored how these data industries imagine frontiers of digital spaces, and they're all clean and smooth and mirroring. And he sees echoes of the industrial sublime in these images and these discourses and these imaginaries from the data industries. But he argues against that when you're building these kind of data platform imaginary worlds. There's dust and there's particles to look at. There's this geology of media and imperfection that he argues in this work, which is a very nice point. And you can see here somebody starting to reflect on that. So you've got this kind of, shiny image, and yet here's somebody working within the environmental sector and thinking about green energy and wanting to be more environmentally friendly. So there's awareness coming in this particular person's discussion about how complete is the chain and what's green within it. And of course, if they're hidden, then they're not coming up in the maps that that people are drawing, because they're undersea data centers, so they're not visible to them. And you've got somebody again saying, well, is this a hard question for me to answer? I don't know what to say about greenness. It's a problem that Netflix and co are the big world businesses, and we're so addicted to them, and I think that isn't the best thing, but yes, sorry, I don't know. So again, very early in the imaginary to kind of find the right discourses. And my final couple of points. Everyone's aware, we know, we've called it different things, but I love this phrase by this wonderful journalist, the enshittification of our platforms. People are aware of it because they are experiencing the enshittification, which is it's all cozy and wonderful and the sun is shining in the Netflix park to start with when you sign the contracts. And then things start to get worse and more shitty and more shitty. And eventually some of these platforms die, we know. And the audience and the customer are getting very little out of it. And you get this, you get this kind of coming through with this sense that now, see in this map, the chain stores, and they describe them literally like Starbucks, literally like these, these brands popping up everywhere in the kind of, in the sort of urban map. And I love the reference to pharmacies, which I think is such an interesting one. So people are aware that it's a playoff with the platforms in terms of the business, and that this enshittification is happening. So commercial foreclosure of Romas, yes. Awareness of the enshittification of platforms, yes. And then you get this person here in Malaysia. Here's their map, right? But the story behind the map is one of great complexity, They're feeling enshittification in action. Netflix is closing down shows, the cost of their Wi-Fi is astronomical, they're not getting a good service anymore. It's not accessible. This isn't a data commons, this isn't the roaming, right to roam. It isn't accessible for a lot of people. Where's that little bit of happiness, they say? Where's that little bit of happiness going when it's commercially foreclosed and things are getting worse? And they end up with this sense, this awareness that the platform capitalism is sort of eating them up. But let's take hope. Let's end on a hope. Random roaming still takes place. And this lovely map shows you can see the random streaming platforms. You can see them scribbling out Prime, moving it out from Netflix. They're starting to change it. And I think sort of understanding that their platform practices are contingent, are changing, and they can cut and run from the Netflix part. They can cut and run from the platform dominance. And I have run out of time, yeah? So I'm going to end there. Thank you.